I'd like to say a word of welcome to everyone to the Salesian House. This evening we have two friends of mine from the United States, Kevin and Patrice McCarthy, who are going to share some experiences about a friend of theirs. But first I'd like to say a little word about discernment. Today there are many people who are receiving messages and visions and allocutions, and it's good to listen and to pray and see if these things are helpful to us. But the one thing I would say to you is that the church, as Catholics, the church is the final judge in anything to do with these things. So I would ask you to be alive and be alert to all of these things, and at the same time don't make a final judgment until the church has gone through its own process. The church doesn't judge quickly. It takes its time and it does a thorough job. So if we are listening to various people, let us listen, and if it's helpful, then that's fine. If somebody else doesn't want to listen, that's okay too. But we always remain open to the final judgment of the church. And that's of vital importance because of the situation that we're living in today. We're going to talk tonight in relation to something which we all tend to use the term of the Mini Judgement. And it's quite surprising that Father Stefano Gobi, who was the instrument in founding the Marian movement of priests, working for Our Lady, has referred to it twice at least, if not more times. I'd also like to refresh your memories that Father Gobi and the Marian movement has been in existence for 25 years. It's the 25th anniversary this year. So with that in mind, I'd just like to read the two references that I'm referring to as a guide for us. The first one was given in October the 2nd, 1992, the Feast of the Holy Guardian Angels, and it's number 478 in the Messages from Our Lady to Father Gobi. Your liberation will coincide with the termination of iniquity, with the complete liberation of all creation from the slavery of sin and evil. What will come to pass is something so very great that it will exceed anything that has taken place since the beginning of the world. It will be like a judgment in miniature, and each one will see his own life and all he has done in the very light of God. And the second reference that I would like to refer to this evening is in number 546. It was given on the Solemnity of Pentecost in 1995, the title Tongues of Fire. Towards the end of that allocution, we are told that, "So it is that you will be enlightened by the divine light, and you will see yourselves in the mirror of the truth and holiness of God. It will be like a little judgment, which will open the doors of your hearts to receive the great gift of divine mercy." This evening we have Kevin and Patrice McCarthy with us from Indianapolis in the United States, in the state of Indiana. Kevin and Patrice are both 49 years old, and they're both from large Catholic families of predominantly Irish background and descent. They're organizing a Eucharistic conference in Indianapolis in July, the 11th, 12th and 13th of July of this year, which will be an extension of the International Eucharistic Congress being held in Poland at the end of this month, May 1997. Kevin and Patrice have experienced a deep conversion within the past 5 years. We have asked them to talk this evening to us about an extraordinary experience of a friend of theirs who, with regard to a special or heightened spiritual experience. It's good to keep in mind that their friend is an Anglican, and I think what they will say will show us the wonder and the gift and the grace of the church to us in this time and in this age. So I'll now introduce you to Patrice and Kevin.
Good evening, everyone. I am Kevin's wife and the mother of our 5 children, and I usually give talks on right to life. And fortunately for you, in Ireland right now, abortion is not legal. And I can't pass up a chance to have a podium and a microphone without saying something about it, because it is one of my topics that I cannot say enough about, because having lived in the United States, where abortion has been legal since 1973, and to see the destruction that it has wrought upon our country with respect to all life, where in 1973, abortion was considered something that would be rare, and now today, over 1.5 million babies are killed every year just in the United States. And now it has stretched so there's respect for no life, where euthanasia has become a daily topic. We see what happens to a world when respect for any life, when one person loses respect of an unborn baby, when the world loves the baby. Where can you go anywhere that the world does not love a baby? And when you see what that can do to a country and to a world, you have to spread that. And if I have one thing to tell you tonight, besides what Kevin's saying, is don't ever let it become legal in Ireland. Preserve your culture and preserve the culture of Christ. He gave his life, his single life, for us, and each child is worth saving. Now, I can step off my bandbox. I want to talk a little bit about our friends. We have permission to tell their story. They did not give us specific permission to use their name, and so we're going to call them Mr. B and Mrs. B, and they have a daughter, Katie. We've got to know them through our daughters. They only have one child. They were only blessed with one child, and she is the daughter of our 3rd child. They were in the same class together in high school, played on the same sports teams, and got to be really good friends. And Mrs. B and I became good friends because you sit in the stands and you talk the whole time the girls are playing their game. Kevin and Mr. B became friends the same way, and just really social friends. You know how you see somebody at school and you talk to them at meetings, and then it became a little more than that. And Mr. B was really interested in religion. He'd done a lot of research. He was an Episcopalian. He was active in his church. And Kevin gave him a book called The Thunder of Justice. And he read this book. One day he called Kevin at his office and said, I want you to teach me the rosary. So he came over to Kevin's office. Now this man is a very down-to-earth, ordinary type man. He plays golf any chance he gets. He's an insurance executive. He's active in his church, but not what you would call over-religious, overzealous, or was not before. He is now more than he was then. Anyway, Kevin taught him to say the rosary. Then, before he knew it, he was saying 15 decades of the rosary a day. And he travels a lot. He has a tape player in his car. He would play different tapes. He would play the rosary, say the rosary along with that. I have to say, at this point, Karen is not as far along as he is in his conversion. Their daughter thinks he's a little wacko, but respects him, and has moved along a bit, and she comes to some things with him. We'll come say the rosary with him, something like that. I mean, it's not where she's off the other end, but she doesn't understand it. And we found that in our family, and I'm sure some of you have experienced it in your family, these things take time. And things don't always happen as fast as we would like them to, or in the way we would like them to. Kevin, Father talked about conversion in the last 5 years. I mean, we were always good Catholics. We always went to church. As a child, my family always said the rosary. Not every day, but often. Anytime we were in the car, we said the rosary. But a few years ago, Kevin was invited. There was this big conference coming into Indianapolis called a fire rally. And they needed some people to come and usher the different priests and bishops around, show them where to go, get them the right place at the right time. And a friend asked Kevin if he'd come down and do it. Well, Kevin didn't want to go do it. I mean, then he said, well, okay, you really need help, I'll come do it. But I'm not going to go. He said to me, I'm going to go, but I'm going to sit in the cloakroom. All I have to do is meet these guys and take them where they need to go. but I don't have to listen. All I have to do is sit in the cloakroom and wait for them. We came home that night, and he said, you know, that was pretty interesting. And that began a change in our life, a change that I didn't quite understand at first, a change our children certainly didn't understand at first, but our whole family has changed. Our oldest son was away, and of all of our children, he's 25. He doesn't quite understand all this. You know, he goes to church on Sunday, and he'll say an occasional rosary, really, I think, to please us more than anything else, so he can tell us that he said a rosary. Our second son is in the seminary. Our third child is a daughter. She's a university student, and she and her younger sister, Molly is a junior in college, will be a senior next year. Bridget will be a sophomore next year. They have become such evangelizers you cannot believe. And they used to laugh about it, and Dad would always be, you know, we walk down the street and we see somebody, and Dad would whip out a holy card and say, you know, oh, here's a Divine Mercy chaplet. And the girls go, oh, you know, oh, no, Dad, you know. Crawl under the table in the restaurant, you know, you're giving the waitress a Divine Mercy chaplet, you know. And Molly told the story of last week. They're working on getting more perpetual adoration at the University of Notre Dame, where they go. And they had just gone to pick up some pamphlets and things from the printer. And they were walking down the street, and this man stopped them, and he was trying to sell them some perfume. Well, they were saying a prayer, and they said, you know, excuse me, we're saying a prayer. If you want to wait a minute, we'll talk to you. Well, then they finished, and this man said, oh, come on, don't you want to buy some perfume? Come on, ladies, you know, buy some perfume. And they said, oh, we can't. We don't have any money. We can't buy perfume. And they were getting ready to leave. And Molly said, all of a sudden, she pulled this Eucharistic adoration bookmark thing out of her back pocket and said, but I have something for you, and handed it to him. And she went, oh, my gosh, I'm turning out to be my dad. You know? But things change, and they have changed so many friends around them. They, just by their example, and just because they are so full of love for Jesus Christ, that they have changed things. And we have found this with our friends that Kevin's going to tell you the story about. My family tell you, never give me a microphone. But you can change each individual person. This friend of ours that Kevin's going to talk about, he went back to his Episcopalian church and started the Anglican Society of Mary. And they meet once a week and say the rosary. And though he's changed those lives, and so many lives are changed in such simple ways. And I think that's the real story behind this, is how one person can affect so many. Jesus Christ saved the world. He was one human being. Now, divine, but one human being who touched 12 other human beings who touched the whole world. And I think that's our mission, each of us. We have to be a missionary for Christ, just as Christ was missionary for God. And this, through our friend, we have learned so much, because it teaches us that we can't take things for granted. And every time you see Bruce, oh, well, he can't keep in what he has. He can't keep in, so it's such an inspiration for us and our lives. So now, I'll be quiet. I am Irish, you can tell, can't you tell? Okay, and Kevin's going to take over with their story.
I'll begin with a prayer. Come, Holy Spirit of Abba and Jesus. Come, sweet Lord and giver of life. Come through the powerful intercession of the sorrowful and immaculate heart of Mary, your well-beloved spouse. Come by the infinite merits of the most precious blood of Jesus. Come to give glory to the Father and the Son. Come and make my gifts seraphic in humility, in love, and in the Trinitarian holiness of your divine will. Amen. Last night, Tom Rochford, I believe it was, asked me to tell the story to a number of people, and then one thing led to another, and now we have a large group here and the blessing of being filmed. Father's told you the lead-in about this mini judgment, and I don't know that what this was a mini judgment, so, but I'll let you decide this for yourself. This friend of mine, and now that she's used his first name, I suppose it won't get back to Indiana, but his name's Bruce, and when Bruce began to become interested in the rosary, and then he began to start this unit of the Anglican Society of Mary. In the United States, the Anglican Society of Mary, it turns out, advocates everything that Marian Catholics advocate. It even advocates that Episcopalians should join up with the Pope, be against artificial birth control, pray the rosary, seek Marian devotion. And my first reaction was, well, why do you all stay in the Anglican Communion? They said, we're asking ourselves the same question. So it's a great miracle that that the Blessed Virgin has become, as the Holy Father has always said, the great star of evangelization. In the wake of the Second Vatican Council, many in the Catholic Church, many priests looked at the Blessed Virgin Mary and the doctrines of the Blessed Virgin Mary as an impediment to unification. And what I have found in my life as a lay evangelist is that the Blessed Virgin Mary leads the way in unification and in bringing Protestants back to the feet of Jesus and to the side of the successor of St. Peter. The most amazing thing about his experience was that he wanted to come to the Catholic Church, and he came one day after I had gone to his Episcopalian service, and he went up and received communion. And afterwards, I very gently and kindly showed him the guidelines to show that he was, as not being a member of the church, he should not receive communion. But I later explained to him that we were beginning a perpetual adoration chapel at the parish of St. Louis de Montfort, and that he could go there and he could participate in the Eucharist as a Protestant by worshiping Jesus present in the Eucharist, even though he could not consume Jesus in communion. So he began a practice. About 6 months later. He called me, he said, I've started to do this. And he says, I don't know why, but I feel like I'm called to go on Saturdays, which I thought was beautiful because Saturday being the day of Our Lady, and him having been brought to this interest in the Catholic Church through the prayer for the Rosary, it seemed quite interesting that he would do this. And every time he went, he would pray as to whether or not he should become a Catholic. Well, after about a year of this, last November, he called me one day, and he was very touched by a healing service done by a Catholic layman by the name of Carver Allen Ames, more commonly known as Alan Ames, who's from West Australia and who had been at this parish of St. Louis de Montfort. So he became more intensely interested in doing the adoration more often and before the monstrance. He called me one day and he said, I need to go to confession to a Catholic priest. And I said, well, Bruce, you know, you have to be a member of the church under normal circumstances to go to confession to a Catholic priest. I said, are you now saying that Jesus is calling you to become a Catholic? And he had said all along that he felt that Our Lady wanted him and Jesus wanted him to remain in the Anglican communion long enough to bring souls with him when he came over. And this is not unusual. There's a Lutheran by the name of Wayne Weibel that's been associated with Medjugorje, and he stayed a Lutheran for quite a while before he became a Catholic after his great experience in Medjugorje. So I thought this is, whatever, I introduced him to a Catholic priest, and, so he'd have someone to be in touch with and getting good discernment. Well, he said, no, he says, no, I'm not supposed to join the church, but I'm supposed to go to confession. Then the next time I talked to him was 2 days, that was a Sunday, 2 days later on Tuesday, and he said he wanted to talk to me and we couldn't get together, and the next morning I called him and his wife said, well, he's gone, it was a work day, and he's gone to St. Louis de Montfort to the Eucharistic Adoration Chapel. I thought, well, that's very unusual. And she said, oh, he was up very early in the morning. Well, I later found out he was up all night because he had this call that he was resisting to go to the monstrance. And he said to me, he said, I've had the warning. I said, what do you mean you've had the warning? He said, I've had the great purification. I've experienced it before the monstrance at St. Louis de Montfort. And he said, I need to go to confession very badly now. So we talked about the fact that at the end of the week, a couple of Catholic priests, one of them, a Father O'Connor from the University of Notre Dame, would be in town. And this was a person who was a Catholic priest who was understanding of the messages of Father Gobi and some of these other things, and might be more understanding for him to go to confession. The next time I talked to him was he came into the door of my office in downtown Indianapolis on Thursday about 11:30 in the morning. And he had been weeping. Now you have to understand, this is not an emotional guy. This is a guy who played baseball in college on a scholarship and played golf on a regular basis. and never really got excited about much of anything. He got kind of excited about praying the rosary, and he was very interested and very much called to this ministry of evangelization, but I'd never seen him really get that emotional. And he said, you know, we're going to have to do something. I said, what do you mean? He says, I need your help. He says, I know you can help me. He said, I have to have this thing called absolution. I said, well, I know what that is. I said, you just told me at the beginning of the week. He says, well, he says, I have to go. He said, I've had this experience. And he said, I was just in a meeting in the largest boardroom in the city, in a business meeting, and every 10 minutes I was crying. And I said, well, what are you telling me? He said, look, he said, I am a miserable wretch. He said, I have seen my soul. God has shown me my soul as he sees it. He said, it's the worst experience I've ever had in my life. But he said, at the same time, it's the greatest experience of love that I've ever had. And he said, I'm not worthy to even know God. I'm not worthy even to be a creature. But he said, I love God so much and God loves me that I want to do this. So I was making arrangements to go, and the priest said, well, I'll be there tomorrow. And he said, no, I've got to go today. And then he went on to relate his experience, and he said about 15 times, I don't deserve purgatory until the end of time. So finally I said, well, what is this all about purgatory at the end of time? He said, well, the way it stands right now, if I don't get this thing called absolution, I will go to purgatory until the end of time if I die. So I said, well, tell me more about this priest. I said, well, I'll take you up to see this priest. I'll cancel my schedule this afternoon. Tell me more about it. He says, well, it comes, just as I've heard it described, he said, it comes in 3 waves. He said, the first thing, I says, I began to see every instance in my life that I committed a sin from the time I was about 7 or 8 years old, very vividly. He said, I can remember all the people were there, like all the people were that were there, the room, the scene, everything. And he said, it just flashed before my eyes, so to speak. I said, well, did you have a vision? He said, no, you can't really see this, but it's like a reawakening of a very vivid memory, switching from each instance to the other. He said, the first thing you see is all of what are called deadly sins. He said, that's what you Catholics call mortal sins. I said, how do you know that? He said, because as part of this experience, it seems like by some infused knowledge, I was given a teaching on the Catholic Church as part of this, that it's the one true church, the only true church, that the other churches are mistaken, that it's a church that is very much filled with evil in its structure right now, but that notwithstanding that, it's the only place I could receive this thing called absolution, other than from a Greek priest. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, an Eastern Orthodox priest has this ability to give me this thing that I have to have called absolution. So I said, tell me more about this. He said, well, he said, I saw all the deadly sins I committed. And he said, then it started all over again. And he said, I saw all of the intentional sins that are not deadly. He said, you know, things where I knew better than to say something bad about a person, but I was in a group and people were making negative comments about someone and putting somebody down. So I would just went ahead and joined the conversation, although I had a little twinge of why am I doing this, but I just went ahead and did it because that's what everybody else was doing. He said, I saw every instance of that in my entire life. He said, now let me tell you the bad news and the good news. He said, the bad news, he said, now Kevin, he says, you know, you're like going to confession every week or two and going to Mass and Communion every day. And he said, the good news for you is you'll not probably get wave 1 or wave 2. He said, but you will get wave 3. I said, well, what is wave 3? He said, I saw every time that I went into a Catholic church and did not genuflect and reverence the tabernacle of the Blessed Sacrament. He said, I would rather experience anything than what I experienced in that 3rd wave, let alone the first 2 waves. He said, so he says, you know, if it's what I think you're going to get, he says, you're not going to be, he says, no one is going to be prepared for this. So as time went on, I got the car. I said, fine, let's go. We're going up there. And he says, well, I said, do we really have to go today? I said, can't you just wait till tomorrow? He says, look, he said, I don't know whether this is true or not. But he said, I believe that if I don't go and get this thing called absolution from a Catholic priest today, that I will be dead tonight. I said, wait a minute, you're not getting suicidal on me. And he said, oh, absolutely not. He said, you couldn't think of such a thing when you're going through this experience I'm going through. He says, if I even begin to do something that's sinful, He said, I had the most terrible pain in my heart and the most terrible sense of offending the love of God, that he said during these last 2 days, he said, I couldn't do anything wrong if I wanted to. It would cripple me. I said, well, that's very interesting. I said, well, okay, we'll go up there. And I said, what do you mean you're going to die tonight? He says, well, I'm going to die of a broken heart. He says, my heart is breaking. He says, I don't see how my soul can stay in my body any longer. He said, this is the greatest grief that you could ever imagine. And he said, it's the greatest experience of love. He says, that's why it is so filled with grief. So we went on and we talked all the way up. We prayed continuously, and I tried to pray for him to get some kind of relief, and we got up there. So when we got there, I went to the chapel, and I went before the tabernacle, and my constant prayer was, Jesus, you know and I know that this is probably this experience of the warring or purification, something like that, and it's on the level. But I said, most of the world won't understand that. So I said, please let this man make a perfect confession, because if I take him back to Indianapolis and his wife sees him acting like this, she's going to think there's something wrong with him mentally. So to make a long story short, he made an hour-and-a-half confession, and he came back, and he is the most well-balanced, happiest man I know today. And he has left the Anglican Church, and he's in the process of being received into the Catholic Church. As a footnote, to decide whether or not something is valid, one of the things I look at as a lawyer is I look at the laws of the church. So when I returned to Indianapolis the next day, I looked up the canon law, because I thought, well, how could it be that this priest gave a person who's not a member of the Catholic Church absolution? And of course, the law of the church since 1983, as approved by the Holy Father, says that a baptized non-Catholic may receive absolution from a priest, one, in danger of death, and second, for another grave reason as approved by the bishop. So it's very easy for a priest, when a man comes in and says, if I don't get this from you, I'll tell you everything, I'll do whatever you have to do in the Catholic Church to receive this sacrament, but if I don't get this from you, I am going to die. And I thought, well, it's probably pretty easy for a priest to decide that even though this person's not a Catholic, he can give him absolution. He later went on to explain to me that he was given to understand that if he had not been, that he was validly baptized. And I said, well, why is that? He said, because if I hadn't been validly baptized, all I would have needed is baptism in order to get this relief. But once you've been baptized, you have to have this thing called absolution. Then he went on to explain very cogently about the sacraments. And I tested him. I said, well, you're in the Anglican communion. They have probably pretty much the same teaching traditionally on the sacraments. And he said, not like this. He said, I was given a teaching as I can name he said, I can name all 7 of the sacraments. And he said, the name I may give them may not be the name the church officially calls them, but I can describe them in detail and tell you what every aspect of it. And he said, I can tell you I never knew what those were. But he was given that, he said, as part of this revelation. So in any event, it seems to be a tremendous experience of the mercy of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary for this man. And his wife is not as attuned to this, so the reason I'm giving you this witness is because he thinks his wife is the point that he can explain it to her, he hasn't wanted to tell his wife. So he said to me, he said, please witness on this. Give my witness for me. Because he said, until my wife's at the place where I think she can understand this, I don't want to talk about it publicly. And I keep telling him he ought to give the witness. And so that's the reason I've told the story this evening. Please pray for them, and please pray for Karen so that she will, and for Bruce, that he'll have the courage to tell the story, because I don't think it's that extraordinary. And they're very much in love, and they're lifelong partners and best friends, and I don't see the problem. But you know, I do understand that if you haven't got a background in the Catholic faith, you might not understand this experience. Not the least of which is to have a background in some of the spirituality, such as Father Gobi's quotations. I was also asked to talk about the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. I became very involved in the Chaplet of Divine Mercy when a religious sister introduced it to me, who was a contemplative sister of the Precious Blood. This is an order of contemplative nuns originally founded in Canada. And also when a woman in my parish, who's of Polish descent, said, I really think this is something that you're called to learn. And I had it for a while and didn't pray it, because when I first began to go through this conversion, I didn't have much edge of discernment. And so when things came to me that were new, that I was not familiar with, I was not quick to examine them. I just let them sit for a while. Well, I've had the experience of having, in what is my opinion, and I'll leave it up to you to discern whether you agree with me, a number of miracles associated with the prayer of the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. And I'm going to tell you now tonight very briefly about 4 of these miracles. The other ones I don't think are maybe the kinds that should be, maybe they're something more of a private nature. The first 2 I'll tell you about are very simple, and they have to do with the desire of a parent to see their child succeed in an athletic contest. The first story is about my nephew, Christopher McCarthy, who plays for the University of Notre Dame football, and he's what's called a walk-on, or a non-scholarship volunteer player. And his father was very concerned that he would be able to stay on the team and get into a game and play and so forth. And I said to him, you know, to me, David, my brother David's 4 years younger than I am, David, I said, you know, this is very trivial. But I said, you know, I will pray for this, for your son, if you, as a sign to you of the power of Eucharistic adoration and of this devotion of divine mercy. So and the reason I said this is because his son was scheduled to go to a meeting, and all of his other teammates who had gone to this meeting had been very charitably and politely kicked off the team for lack of prowess. So on a Saturday afternoon, which by coincidence the University of Notre Dame was not playing that afternoon, I was in my office and I said, I made a commitment to this, so I'll do this. So I went out to what we call the Divine Mercy Adoration Chapel, which is a 24-hour-a-day perpetual adoration chapel, our first in Indianapolis. And I went out there and I followed this teaching or revelation of very closely of Maria Faustina. In this revelation, Maria Faustina was told by Jesus that he would like to be remembered as dying at 3 o'clock, and that souls could step into the tabernacle and say a short prayer, a very short prayer, in memory of his passion at 3 o'clock, and if they said it in faith, he would grant anything. He also said for anyone who prays the Chaplet of Divine Mercy any time of the day, that this prayer would yield miracles, astounding miracles in effect, and anything they prayed for would be granted. I also believe that if you answer the gospel call to wait and watch with Jesus for 1 hour, exposed in the monstrance, and you don't ask him for anything for an hour, then you can ask him, and your prayer is more likely to be granted. So my practice has been in my prayer ministry to kind of pile on. What I do is I go at about 1:55 in the afternoon, and I wait and watch sincerely with Jesus for 1 hour. I don't ask for anything. I say prayers of love, adoration, praise, thanksgiving, and reparation. And then about 3 o'clock high, I begin a Chaplet of Divine Mercy, which memorializes his death at 3 o'clock, and which also says the chaplain. Well, I did this day, and I said, Jesus is a sign to my brother. Let's say that Christopher doesn't get kicked off the team. Let's say he stays on the team, and not only that, even though he's never played in a game, he gets in a game within 7 days exactly, within 168 hours, the hours of adoration. And then, like I always do, I forgot the prayer. And I hadn't heard anything for a whole week, and I had to go to a meeting, and I had tickets to the Notre Dame game the next week, which I didn't even remember I had the tickets when I said the prayer. So I took a guy from my Christ Renews parish group in my parish, and we went up to the game. It was the only Notre Dame game I was ever late for, but this guy really wanted to go, so the other person who was supposed to go with me got sick and couldn't go, so I went on up. We were sitting there, and we got towards the end of the game, and I remarked that, wasn't it sad that they had not only kicked my nephew off the team, but someone with his number had come into the game to kick the extra point. I said they've actually reassigned his jersey all in, a week's time. Now, mind you, I'd forgotten about the prayers, I said. I mean, I knew I prayed for it, but I wasn't overly serious about it. I prayed with great faith, and I prayed if it was the will of God, my nephew would continue on the team, but then I just forgot about it. And I assumed he was kicked off the team because I hadn't heard anything from my family. So it was on national television, and they didn't even know the name of the person who kicked the extra point. So he got this player got this 1 point, and then the same player came back for the kickoff, and at that time, they gave his name as Christopher McCarthy. And I looked at my watch, and it was 6 days, 23 hours, and 57 minutes since I had asked Jesus to see that he got 1 point within a week. So another story I'll tell you is my family doctor I've known for many years. He had a son who got into this cathedral prep school where our children had gone, and he played in the football team. And to make this story, long story short, He said, would you come to the game, would you pray for my son? I said, well, your son's on defense. And he said, well, yeah, and he said, why don't you pray that he'll get a touchdown? No, pray that he gets in the game. I said, no, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll pray that he gets a touchdown as a sign to you of the importance of Eucharistic adoration. He said, well, the chance of a defensive player getting a touchdown is, minuscule. Some of the greatest defensive players in the United States in professional football have played football for 35 years and never scored a single point, even though they're all Americans. And I said, I understand that, but I'll do it as a sign. And amazingly, at the critical point in the game, when Cathedral Prep needed a touchdown, they got the other team down against the goal line. The other team fumbled the ball, and young Mr. Brogan recovered in the end zone, got 6 points, scored a touchdown. So even though he was a defensive player, he scored. And immediately, I was sitting with the doctor. He looked at me, and he said, okay, enough, So the last time I saw him, I said, have you done that hour of adoration? Those are two trivial stories to some people. They seem trivial because they seem like this is inconsequential. But in these people's lives, and in the American culture, unfortunately, athletics and athletic competition has become that's all that, people talk about. They don't talk about Jesus, they don't talk about Mary, ever, but they'll spend, especially men, will spend their entire waking hours, if they're not lusting after women, talking about football. So I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing. Now I'll tell you two other stories about the Chapel of Divine Mercy. One, I think they're very telling. We worked on a program called Promise Keepers, which a Protestant group started, an interdenominational meeting, and they would bring together as many as 60,000 men who would make promises to their families, and they make these 7 promises. And when they would come, they would bring their pastors. Well, they never had Catholics until 1994. And the first time they invited Catholics was at Indianapolis, Indiana, in the same facility we have scheduled for this Eucharistic conference. And they asked me, somebody at the Archdiocese, would you get involved in this and help promote this? And I prayed about it, and I said, I don't feel called to do that. I said, I feel called to open up the Catholic Church, the beautiful old Catholic Church across the street, and have confessions for these men. Because if they're going to go through a conversion experience and they're Catholics, going up to the altar and getting a Bible and doing what they call an altar call in the United States isn't going to cut it. I mean, if they come from a sacramental background, they've been to confession, they'll need confession. So in order to get into this organization, the only way we could publicize is we did posters, and the posters had the Jesus of Divine Mercy, that's the original one, and there may be some around here. It's very similar to this image of the Jesus of Divine Mercy. We put those on these posters, and our volunteers on Friday, it was a Friday, Saturday night event, all day Saturday. On Friday night, our volunteers went in to put the posters up in this 60,000 person indoor stadium facility. And this Protestant group wouldn't let them do it because they said this isn't approved in advance, and we only do things that are approved in advance. So I thought, how are we going to get the word out? So that night we had the doors open in the church, and quite a few men saw the doors open and came in and went to confession. And we made it available for Protestant people to pray, and they could go even see the priest if they wanted to. So the next morning I got up and I went down to St. John's, and I got there, and I had a lot of work to do in my office, and I was counting on some other volunteers, and the volunteers weren't there. And we had a complication with the street being blocked off so these men could march to a place for lunch. So I said, well, now relax, this isn't your work anyway. This is Jesus' work, because I was inspired by the devotion of Maria Faustina and the Jesus of Divine Mercy and her diary, where the sacrament of penance and the Eucharist are so heavily focused on by Jesus. So I just went before the tabernacle, and I said a chaplet of Divine Mercy, and I said, now Jesus, you got to work a miracle here. I said, this is your work, not mine. None of the volunteers are here. And there's no way we're going to be able to get the word out to this large group, I don't think. So I prayed that, and I went back into the rectory and made a few phone calls, and the volunteers weren't there yet. And so I was starting out to pray another chaplet of Divine Mercy before the tabernacle. And as I did, a man came in the church, and there were only 2 of us there, and this man came in and he said, I have to see the pastor immediately. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, I don't know. He said, we've done something wrong over here about this Promise Keepers. I don't know what it is, but he said, I need to see. I said, well, he's gone to his college anniversary, and I'm kind of in charge of the church right now. And I said, did someone call you from the Archdiocese? No. Did someone call you from this parish? No. I said, okay. I said, well, all I know is, I said, I'm working on this thing, and I said, the problem we have is that we can't get these posters up inside the building across the street. Mind you, I didn't even know what this man did. And I said, the other thing is that, you know, my volunteers aren't here. He said, well, you know, he says, I'm the general manager of the stadium across the street. And he said, if you'll give me your 150 posters, I'll personally put them up for you. I said, isn't that strange? That's wonderful. I've forgotten about the prayer, I said, you understand, because I'm focusing on, oh, this is great, you know. Then he said, let me introduce you to my co-manager, and we're going to make special arrangements for your volunteers to get through the police line and get in here to the church parking lot. And I asked him again, I said, well, who told you to come over here? I said, someone had to tell you that there was a complaint or something like that. He said, no, no one called me. I said, well, can't you tell me? He says, well, if you must know, about 5 or 10 minutes ago, I was sitting at my desk in the office of the general manager of the Hoosier Dome and Convention Center, and he said, listen to these words, I was seized with such guilt that I must have mercy on St. John's Church over this Promise Keepers program. And I could get no relief until I came over here and found out what needed to be done and did it. He personally took the 150 posters and he put them up and he said, don't worry, since I run the place, they can't tell me to take them down. And that night we had 7 priests hearing confession for 3 hours with 7 men in each of the 7 lines at almost all times. Well over 100 men had their confessions heard. There may have been over 300 actually when it was all said and done. So to me, I thought this was a great sign of the power of the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. The last story I'll tell you happened 6 months after that. A couple that we're very close to lost their daughter in an automobile accident. They hired a lawyer to bring a lawsuit to recover. The lawyer was allegedly corrupted by the insurance company, and he let their lawsuit, even though he was had a reputation one of the finest lawyers in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, he let the case languish and it almost died. They came to me, and I knew a man who belonged to Opus Dei, who was a very devout Catholic and who was considered the greatest trial lawyer in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And I called him and he said, you know, I don't want to take this case. He said, it's too messy. He said, you know, among other things, whoever takes this case may have to sue this other lawyer for malpractice and bad behavior. And he said, I don't want to do this. He said, this is just too complicated. You know, he says, no lawyer likes to get into a mess with another lawyer and so forth and so on. I said, well, you know, it's a great attribute of God, the greatest attribute of God is mercy. Why don't you have mercy and at least see these people? So he said he would see them the following Monday. And of course, I'm 600 miles away, roughly. So I made a note of it to pray the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at their 1:30 meeting, and I did not. But I had a practice in my office of always praying the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at 3 o'clock. So when 3 o'clock came up, I said, well, uh-oh, I better pray the Chaplet real quick. And, you know, this was a meeting where I took a lot of risk by putting these people together because it was dear friends that did not know each other. The lawyer, I'd been a childhood friend. And these other people were very emotional. And, you know, if the lawyer said no, there was a chance that it could have really affected my relations. And not only was the man who lost the child a friend, but he was a very close business, so we had to do a lot of business together. And sometimes you don't want to mix business with these kind of things. I do all the time anymore, but by the grace of God, carefully. But it is a difficult situation. So I prayed the chaplet, and I said, may these prayers be effective retroactively, if that's possible. And I forgot about it, like I always do. But then it came around Thursday, and I hadn't heard from the man who had the problem with the lawyer. And so I kind of assumed that this must have not gone well. So I called the house towards the end of the day, and he wasn't there. So I asked the son, the surviving son, if I could speak to the mother, and I did. And she said, I said, how are you? And she said, oh, I'm doing great. I said, oh, wonderful. So I still assumed that the lawyer had said he wouldn't represent him, but somehow or another they just decided to go on with their life. I said, well, that's great. And she said, well, you did hear what happened to the meeting with your friend Jerry. I said, no. She said, well, it was very strange. She said, we met at 1:30. We spent about an hour telling him about the whole case and all our problems. About 2:30, he began to tell us all the reasons why he couldn't take the case. And she said, I thought about 10 minutes to 3, he was about to show us out of his office. And we asked another question or something, and she said, then I noticed, and she said, I don't know why I looked at my watch. Now, mind you, I'd never told this woman I was praying for. I never told her about the devotion for the Jesus Divine Mercy or the hour of mercy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She said, for some reason, at 3 o'clock, I looked at my watch. And she said, I thought then for sure we were going to be shown out of the office. She said, just a few minutes after 3, bolt upright, he got up out of his chair and began to look out the window behind him, as if someone way up in the sky was looking at him. And we thought this was very unusual. And she said this went on for about, 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. And she said, then all of a sudden, his distraction ended, and he turned around and said, listen to these words, I am seized with such guilt that I must have mercy on you. I will take your case. The exact same words that the manager of the convention center had used, the exact same lexicon, the very verbiage that he had used when he was sitting in his office and when I was crying out to heaven for help from somebody. Not only did the Jesus of Divine Mercy send someone off the street, no, he called the very man who could do everything for me. In this case, this man took their case and it came to a successful conclusion. I can tell you many, many stories like this. Some have a personal aspect. Some are even more dramatic, but I don't like to tell them in public. But what I would say is, from my own experience, and this is just my own witness, this is if you have a chance to read the diary of Maria Faustina, read it. And do keep in mind what Father said about the church being the final judge of things. But in her case, she's probably going to be canonized this year. She's already been beatified. She was beatified over 4 years ago. And I would say that if you read the diary and you read it and take it to heart, you should really, more often than not, you should read it literally. Because I take it literally, and I take what was said there in the context of being said to anyone who follows that devotion. I take it quite literally, and I take it in faith. And if you have the faith, and you reflect upon this particular devotion of Divine Mercy, which is clearly related to the devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and to other revelations to other great saints, including St. Gertrude the Great, long before the fullness of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, I think that you will find that in there, the central truths of the Catholic faith come alive. The great emphasis on Divine Mercy is the emphasis on Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament and the Sacrament of Penance. And also adoration or prayer, Eucharistic prayer outside Mass. I think this is the central message of Jesus Christ and the central message within the context of the Church, of what the Church brings to mankind. And it is true that Jesus is an ocean of mercy. He is an unfathomable ocean of mercy. And you cannot even begin to realize how much he loves you and wants to forgive you and wants to heal you. And that is the central aspect of this message. And because he wants that message to get out, he really has granted these graces to the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. You really can pray this devotion. And again, I'm sure there are many other devotions like it. In fact, I know there are in the Church because I've done a little bit of a study on it. Historically, there was great prayers given to St. Bernardine in time of prayer in time of crisis, which is almost the identical theology. So heaven's been trying to reach us for a long time with these kinds of devotions. And I would say that, you know, I can't say enough about its power, and because its power is related to the Mass and to Calvary, to the great sacrifice. The last thing I'll tell you is that there's a prayer that's said to Jesus and actually to the Eternal Father, offering up the blood of Jesus. It's a simple prayer, and in the revelations of St. Gertrude the Great, and she's the only female saint called Great. She's a Benedictine from Switzerland. Jesus, in so many words, said to her one time, I'm telling you about my Sacred Heart 400 years early than I intended to tell anyone, because the doctrine of the Sacred Heart, St. John appeared to her and said the doctrine of the Sacred Heart was being saved until the end times. But he said, I'm telling you about this simply because of my love for you and my human nature. Because in my human nature, in your human nature, in your humanness, you have responded to me. And you have responded to my graces with such closeness that we've become so close personally. One human soul to another, one divine human soul to one human soul. That you have, in effect, you have so caused this response in me that I'm going to tell you about my Sacred Heart 353 years before the fullness of the revelation was given to St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. And St. Gertrude the Great, There's this prayer to St. Gertrude the Great, which I know many of you know because Father Michael Ross, after I got to know him, I found out that he evangelizes this prayer. But it goes like this: Eternal Father, I offer you the most precious blood of your divine Son, Jesus, in union with the masses said throughout the world today, for all the holy souls in purgatory, for sinners everywhere, for sinners in the universal church, those in my own home and within my family. Amen. Now, every time you say that, Jesus has promised that 1,000 souls are released from purgatory. If you say it under the usual conditions, you know, you're in the state of grace and you're praying from the heart with intention. This is very difficult for modernists and other people in the Catholic Church today to accept. They just can't accept these things. They can't believe that there's that much mercy in God. And I guess that was a great blockage to my faith for many years. Having been educated at the University of Notre Dame, a lot of philosophy and theology, a lot of modernist teachers, they want tangible proof of everything. But everything I've been talking about here tonight has to do with unseen realities. The most important things in human life are almost never seen by those who even follow their faith with great response and great duty. You don't see Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, but you believe he is there. You don't see a human creature made in the image and likeness of God, another one inside a pregnant woman, but you believe she's there. You believe that unseen to your eye, that pregnant woman is carrying another creature made in the image and likeness of God. And you can't see, touch, or verify scientifically these revelations that have been given to the saints. But if you pray for faith and in faith, I guess it's my witness that, for me, I take Jesus at his word. If the church has approved a saint and approved a saint's revelations, and many, many popes have blessed the prayer of St. Gertrude the Great and granted an indulgence to it, that's good enough for me. If she says Jesus told her that every time you say this prayer, 1,000 souls are released from purgatory, and at least 3 popes have granted indulgence to that prayer and they say it, and the usual conditions are present, saying it in faith, saying it in a state of grace, saying it prayed from the heart and thoughtfully. As far as I'm concerned, every time you say it, you've released 1,000 souls from purgatory. And that's the last thing I would leave you with. That's something that, again, purgatory is an unseen reality. Hell is an unseen reality. Heaven is, for most of us, is an unseen reality in this life. But these are the most important things in life, the things that are unseen, the unseen creatures and the unseen love and mercy of God. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say thanks to Kevin and Patrice, and to remind you again that, of course, we were talking about a personal experience of that person which they spoke about from a friend of theirs in the United States. I don't know if there are any questions or comments. We'd welcome them, and we'd be happy to hear from you if you have anything to say. Or anybody got any little? Tom?
I'd like to ask Kevin, how does he anticipate the global effect of the war on his life?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes I thought that the warning will occur, that it's going to occur in an instant as an instant to God, and that's not an instant, that it's actually beginning to occur now because people are going through this experience all over the world. Maybe it won't happen all at the same time. If this whole idea of the warning, in fact, is a properly discerned and valid thing. On the other hand, on the other end of the scale, I wish the official church structure would give this prophecy a little more attention. Because if it did happen simultaneously to everybody in the world, it would create, not only would it be the greatest event in the world, arguably, but it would create the greatest need for ministry by the ordained sacerdotal priesthood in the history of the world. It would be a day they would never forget, because they themselves would, of course, experience this same thing.
Oh, what Bruce said.
Yeah, well, Bruce said that there'll be many priests. He had heard, he studied this, you know, because he became intensely interested in this whole idea of the warning of purification, having having experienced it himself. And he read that one of the revelations or prophecies said that many priests would die in the confessional. And he said, I know now why they'll die in the confessional. He said they'll die in the confessional because they'll be alone in many parts of the world. They will not be with another priest. They will not get absolution themselves. And he said, I'm satisfied that they will probably die martyrs of a broken heart. And he said it would be a horrendous experience to go through and this, he told me this actually at one point when he actually even hadn't gone to confession yet. He said, I can't imagine having to listen to what the story I'm going to tell if I was a priest and had not received absolution, because every person that would come in and tell me their story would reopen these great wounds of love that I had for the Blessed Trinity. And he said, if I were to die of a broken heart, he said, many, many priests will. And he said, this idea that somehow the priests would all be rushed in the confessionals. He said, he said, at this point in my life, he said, I wouldn't be capable of doing anything as unchristian as trying to put myself the first person in line. He says, you're not capable of it, because as soon as you started to do it, you'd again be seized with guilt. So he said, the only thing I can say is that, that needs to be taken into account. And he told me that over and over again. He's told me that many times since. He said, the only thing I got to say is, can't the Pope or somebody, of course he doesn't know much about the church and the structure, he says, can't the Pope or somebody say, look fellas, this may be totally bogus, but if it's on the level, you ought to have a plan.
Thank you, Tom. Con?
What advice would you give people, presuming that this is going to come in the next few years or whatever, what advice would you give from the experience of your friend to prepare themselves?
Well, I'm not really in a position to give advice on something like that. I mean, I asked one of the priests here, but if I could say that the basic advice that I give anybody is to pray always that your heart will be converted and open to God, and go to Mass and Communion every day, and go to confession at least once every 10 days to 2 weeks, and pray the Rosary daily, and try to live the gospel message. And even if the warning never happens, I'm sure it'll all turn out real well for you.
Any other comment or question? Sorry, Jim.
In connection with the Marian movement book, there is one revelation concerning Our Lady said in connection with the Revelation. In the book of Revelation, she said, all will be revealed by the end of 1998. What is your opinion on that?
How I can speculate that all day long. I think that I just don't really have a strongly held opinion. I accept to say that I find it interesting and look forward joyously with the hope that some of these revelations will, in fact, develop into, very positive events in the life of mankind. But other than that, I won't hazard an opinion. I have maybe a private opinion, but I don't think that's important, because I don't think you really need to worry about days or times. I think the thing that needs to be done is you just need to answer the call to personal holiness and answer the call to proclaim Jesus. And if you don't say the sweetest word in all the world, which is Jesus, you're not really proclaiming. We have these beautiful Franciscans here this evening, and they tell the story about St. Francis and one of his young Franciscan brothers, and they walked through Assisi for 4 hours. And they came back, and the young brother said, well, I thought we were going to go preach. And he said, well, we just did. If you're a St. Francis of Assisi, and if you have the stigmata, you can walk through a village for 4 hours with your head down, dressed like they are, and you will have preached. But if you're dressed like I am or like everybody else in this room, I strongly suggest that you use the name of Jesus to people, because then you'll be sure that you're proclaiming. But I think generally, because I've had a pretty solid background in Catholic formation, I knew this man before he went through and knew what the Anglicans taught and what he knew about it. From my own personal opinion, he instantly gained immense knowledge of the Catholic Church that he never had before. I know he had this knowledge because when I would ask him questions, he would answer them perfectly, accurately, with such detail. He would use slightly different vocabulary, like when he said, well, I'm taught that these are deadly sins. Of course, the most predominant English translation of the Epistle of St. John, when he refers to mortal sin, is deadly sin. So, I mean, I don't know. What do we know? Maybe the Catholic theologians that speak English should be using the word deadly instead of mortal. I don't know, but it's all the same thing. But he'd use a little bit different words. But basically, the concepts, his concept, he recited for me exactly what the 7 sacraments were. And I don't really think that he had been taught this, the fullness of that teaching in his little Episcopalian Sunday school.
Mm-hmm. No other comments? Maybe just to draw it together, I was anxious that we would listen to Kevin's story because I'm a member of the Marian movement myself, and I'm aware of what Father Goby has said. And I think it does add a little bit of an insight into what we understand as due to becoming would be the mini judgment. But I don't think we should see it in the context of fear or anxiety. I think it's very important that we live our Christian lives in peace and tranquility, doing our daily duties, whether we're priests or whether we're single people, lay people, parents or children. The important thing is that we're peacefully and joyfully living our Christian lives. So I wouldn't want any kind of anxiety or tension to be developing. I really feel that it is helpful to hear this. I was quite, I suppose, joyful at the commentary which came from Kevin, and that's why I was anxious that it would be made available to other people. So I think it will be helpful if we're aware that this is something good, something loving, something beautiful, and which is going to prepare us all to live the Christian life better. And we will, please God, with God's grace, be better people all round, more loving people and more joyful people and more hope-filled people. So, you know, for that reason, I was anxious that we would hear Kevin's testimony about his friend in the United States. And as he says, it's a personal experience, which each one of us, you cannot take away a person's own experience. And it's important that we see it in that context. But I feel that it would add a little insight into what we're talking about.
Then I would just parrot that by saying the last thing I said is that this man is very well balanced and as happy as he could be now. So the point is he was granted the grace of making a perfect confession. Padre Pio and St. John Vianney both had the gift of reading hearts. And we always hear about the economy of salvation. The way I look at this, the Blessed Mother may be preparing through the Blessed Trinity the world so that she doesn't have to give all the priests the gift of reading hearts and pulling it out of these souls. They're all going to go make perfect confessions anyway. So
thanks again, Kevin.
Thank you.
Patrice, thank you. And thanks to all of you. We'll just finish off with a little prayer. God, our Heavenly Father, we praise and worship you, and we thank you for all your grace and blessings. We thank you for all that we have and all that we are. And we ask now that all that we do will be for your honor and glory. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. O Mary, conceived without sin, Saint Joseph, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.